a leader, even if you think you've done the right things,
Right.
but if the people you're trying to lead don't think so, you've got to somehow accommodate that, just like you would in a relationship. He was talking about marriage. As you go forward, is there any way in which you want to signal to the American people that you're going to change your approach?
The bottom line is that we're constantly thinking, is what we're doing working as well as it could? Do we have other options and other alternatives that we can explore?
Ooh, but was the marriage really on the rocks? That was President Obama, who went on to kind of dodge a question more clearly and specifically about the fate of Tim Geithner and Larry Summers. That was him dodging just the day before, announcing that Summers will be leaving by the end of the year. Did you have any inkling this was coming?
There were rumors in Washington that it was coming, and maybe for the wrong reasons. It might actually be true in this case, that it was family reasons and pressures and a desire to get out of the 24-hour workday that drove him out.
Well, no one's worried, or at least not too worried, about Larry Summers himself. Just for a quick reminder, CBS brought us this quick thumbnail sketch of his financial past before joining the White House earlier last year. Take a look.
Financial disclosure forms released by the White House show Summers received more than $5 million working one day a week with a hedge fund within the last 2 years. He also raked in some $2.7 million in speaking fees, with more than $600,000 from bailed out banks. Among them, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, and J.P. Morgan.
So Summers will probably go back to some of that. What about his ideas?
Well, Larry Summers was the leading proponent of the bankrupt economic ideology that got us in this mess in the first place. And it was a tragic choice on the part of the president to put him in charge of economic policy, particularly without any strong counterweight. His ideas about free markets, about not being too tough on banks with the Recovery Act, not doing enough stimulus, have really left us in a terrible, terrible mess.
But with the departure of Christine Roma and then Peter Orszag, and Summers is the third, there are people saying this is the shift in direction we've been looking for.
It could be. It could also be that the president could look to strengthen his corporate bona fides and bring in someone from the corporate sector to make him seem less hostile to business. Now, I don't think he has been very hostile to business. I think there's some hope that perhaps the president will see that the road to recovery is through economic populism and shift course, but I think the die is far from cast.
All right, so there may be devils we don't know yet, waiting just in the
Indeed.
sidelines.
Indeed.
All right, let's go to the other bit of the news of the day, and that was what happened in the Senate yesterday. Sometimes a defense appropriation bill going down is kind of good news, but in this case, it really means the delay for this session, I think, of any consideration of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell or the DREAM Act.
Yeah.
What do you think really happened there? Was it a failure of leadership or just the GOP as usual?
Well, I think to his credit in this case, Senator Reid has been desperately trying to bring immigration legislation to the floor for months. The Republicans have been saying no to every version of every proposal, and then they said, look, we might vote for some of these provisions, but not under these procedural rules. I think it was a pretty transparent, flimsy excuse to not deliver for Latinos, to obstruct the rights of gays and lesbians.
But Susan Collins of Maine says she was part of 60 votes. She believed that there had been secured those 60 votes, at least on the issue of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, something she supported against her party, a Republican. Yeah. Lady Gaga was out there in Washington State, you know, pitching for repeal.
Yeah.
She says it was that cap on amendments that Harry Reid imposed at the last minute that scuttled the deal.
I think the real issue is the Republicans desperately wanted to avoid giving any victories to key constituencies to energize them in advance of the elections, and she was offered amendments on issues that were not related to immigration and LGBT issues, and she refused the deal.
Yeah. Well, there'll no doubt be more discussion of that. And people are curious, there's an interesting blog at Pam's House Blend today. We'll link to it at the site. Let's move on to what happens next.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you, like I and many of the people on the show, feel a bit stymied, feel very stymied, frustrated. You spoke eloquently at Netroots Nation recently about how the moral language of liberalism was being bogged down and defeated, really, by conservative assumptions. How does it regain its voice?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is to stop apologizing. We have an alternative that believes that government has a role, that we have a role collectively in solving problems, that wealth isn't just created by heroic entrepreneurs, it's created by everybody. People who do work to care for others, to build infrastructure, to parent, that all of that counts in creating wealth, and that it should be distributed much more equitably, and that we have an environment that has to be factored into how we think about broadly shared prosperity. So we have ideas. We are often cowed, or at least political leaders are often cowed by the ferociousness of the argument from conservatives.
To give people a little bit of an idea of the kind of work that you do at the Center for
Yeah.
Community Change, I'm going to play a PSA that you prepared actually on the DREAM Act,
Yeah.
profiling a young man who was facing deportation.
Yeah.
Take a look.
I came from India when I was 1.5 years old. Came with my mom, my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins. I was always happy at home. I've learned that American culture from them, and I've always enjoyed it. As I was growing up, I didn't know any other country. As far as I knew, I was whatever all my other friends were, and they're American, and I consider myself the same as them.
He's a very hard-working student. I can believe in spite of all that, he did his best. He stayed up, he studied, he did his work, he helped his little brother.
He has gone through a whole lot of disturbance, like his parents been deported, and he kept up his studies. I wonder how many kids will do that.
Well, I told my closest friends, and they were like, hey, we'll take care of you, which they did. They're like the best friends I have, like the best friends any kid could ask for.
What happened to that guy?
This is a young man who was brought to the country as a very young child by his parents. They went out of status, became undocumented. He didn't even know he was undocumented. Grew up as an American kid, great student, great member of the community, and then his parents were deported, and then he faced an order of deportation. So we fought to stop him being deported by the Obama administration, and we succeeded, at least for a year. But the truth is there are 1 million young people in this situation who are living in limbo, who are an American in all but name, who desperately need a path to citizenship.
Will the One Nation March that we'll be covering live with Free Speech TV right here on Grit TV be bringing those kinds of stories? What's your strategy to really get this kind of story told and seen and heard more broadly?
Yes. Well, this is a march to bring us back together, to re-galvanize the energy on the progressive side, to push back against the politics of fear and hate and division that have so scared us and demoralized our side. And we're going to do that by leading with the stories of average people who are struggling with unemployment, a broken immigration system, foreclosures. They will be the voice of this march, and we're going to mobilize for the elections, but we are going to, after that, press for a bold progressive agenda to turn our country around. That's the genius of the One Nation mobilization.
After that. But there are people that say, oh, this is just a turnout effort.
Oh, no, not at all. This is not a we've got Obama's back effort. There will be speakers who will be very critical of what the Obama administration hasn't done or has done. And it's really an accountability effort. It's to say the responsibility is ours to make the change we want to see in the country. It's not about politicians. It's about whether we can generate a social movement from the bottom up to change the country.
All right, well, we'll be there with you to see. Thanks so much for coming in, Deepak. There's much more information about the One Nation rally at our website, grittv.org. And if you want to help our coverage, you can contribute at the website. Thanks.